Hi, welcome to the podcast. Today we're going to be diving into an interview with Dr. Danene Fast, who also just so happens to be my mom. Before we start, I just wanted to give a quick context to what track we're going to be taking for this. So I've crafted 2 questions for each of our 3 units, one simple and one more complex. So I'll be interviewing Dr. Fast today, and after each unit is covered, we'll be doing an analysis of what she has to say. So without further ado, let's have a listen. Good afternoon, Dr. Fast. Today we're going to be diving into several topics I've been learning about in my education psychology class. Some of these are going to include diversity in the classroom, motivational skills, and other specific classroom strategies. Before we start today, I want to give you a quick opportunity to introduce yourself. Like, what's a summary of your background and experience on education or just as a teacher in general?
Hi, Andrew. Thanks for that. Just to start, I'll let you know that I received my undergraduate teaching degree in 1995 from a very small little state school in Pennsylvania called Kutztown University. There I was a dual major as both an elementary education teacher and a special education teacher. And before I decided to become a full-time special education teacher, I actually got to teach in a 2nd grade and a 4th grade classroom. After teaching for a few years, I went to Western Michigan University, where I received my master's degree in orientation and mobility. That's actually using a white cane to teach people who are blind how to travel. And after that, I moved to Ohio, where I worked for 14 years at the Ohio State School for the Blind here in Columbus. In that capacity, I worked with many students and their families throughout the state. And as part of that, I realized that there's a lot of kids in Ohio who do not have specialized teachers of the blind. So that led me to pursue my doctoral degree from The Ohio State University so I could enter teacher prep. And that's where I am now here at the university level. I work as a professor in both elementary and special education, and I also oversee the O&M program here. My professional passion has always been to be a teacher. I've had a rich background achieving my teaching goals in several different capacities during my career.
Thank you for all of that. For diversity in the classroom, during my class, I specifically studied the impact of socioeconomic status and how it relates to education and different classroom dynamics. However, I know you have a more extensive experience in the field of special education and working with students that have visual impairments. Some of these questions are pretty broad, so let's really take it in any direction you see fit. For the first question, I want to ask you, what strategies do you use to address diverse needs of students in your classroom? How do you balance meeting the needs of all students, especially those with various learning abilities?
That is an excellent question. As a teacher, my philosophy of education tends to highlight the importance of equity within the classroom. As an educator, I believe that all students can learn if they're given an opportunity. And in providing those opportunities, it's important to recognize that all students don't necessarily learn the same way. For example, you said visual impairments. Kids who are blind use Braille. In the same line with that, it's very important as a teacher to recognize that differentiation is essential in ensuring that access to learning is available for all students. Before discussing strategies, the best thing that I think you can do as a teacher is to get to know your students. Know which students have an IEP. That's an individualized education service plan that's designed for students who have disabilities. In addition, I encourage you to get to know your students' home lives. You talk about socioeconomic status. Do they have parents who are involved? Do they live in poverty? Those kind of things will affect how you should approach teaching and learning. The biggest thing I can tell you is once you know your students, you can better balance meeting their needs in your classroom and plan for that differentiated instruction.
Thanks for that. So kind of going off the same idea of diversity in the classroom, how do you think teachers can create an inclusive learning environment where all students feel valued and supported? I already know this question doesn't have a simple answer, knowing you work with inclusion in the classroom, but what do you think are some heavy hitters for all teachers to consider?
You are correct. This definitely does not have a simple answer. In fact, I teach an entire 14-week course on this same topic at Ohio State, where I challenge university students to explore this subject in depth. However, to answer your specific questions on what are some heavy hitters to focus on with regard to inclusion, I'm going to start just by revisiting my first answer to you. Get to know your students. This is my very first piece of advice and one of my most important pieces of advice. Secondly, don't be afraid to differentiate your teaching. If something doesn't work the first time, try it again in a different way. As a new teacher, remember that you're human. Sometimes things will work, sometimes they won't, and you'll need to try again, and that's okay. In line with that, as a teacher, keep a positive attitude. Just as you are human, so are the kids that you're going to be working with. If they mess up, see their behavior, not the student. Having a classroom where there's mutual respect and understanding is a wonderful way to nurture an inclusive environment. And that goes full circle here. Going back to what we first talked about, in order to do that, get to know your students.
Dr. Fast's emphasis on differentiated instruction is a key strategy in addressing diverse needs for students, ensuring that all students have equal access to learning. By knowing her students' individual learning profiles and backgrounds, she can tailor lessons to support their range of abilities. This aligns with Vygotsky's zone of proximal development. This approach ensures that students engage at their level, promoting success and growth. In my future classroom, I can use this by incorporating tiered assessments and hands-on experiments that allow my students to explore concepts in a way that resonate with their own learning styles. She also highlights the importance of building strong relationships with students and being flexible in teaching methods. She encourages teachers to get to know their students on a more personal level, which fosters a sense of trust and belonging, crucial elements in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This not only promotes the emotional security, but also drives motivation. I plan to implement this regularly by checking with my students, learning about their interests, personal lives, and being open to adjusting plans when needed. In doing so, I'll create a classroom environment where all students are valued and motivated to succeed. After hearing her insight on Unit 1, we dove more into the learning and motivational theories behind education. Let's hear what she had to say. Kind of transitioning into our second unit. For this unit, I studied behaviorism, particularly positive and negative reinforcement, and how these principles can be applied in a classroom to motivate students. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on how these concepts might play into the role of motivation. So my first question here is, which motivation techniques do you find most applicable in your teaching? And how do you implement them to keep your students motivated?
Going back, I'll start by going back to my last answer. Don't forget, kids are human. If they mess up, see their behavior, not the student. Don't dislike a student because of a behavior, because typically that behavior is happening because of another reason. Find out what that reason is. It can be something as simple as not having breakfast. It can be something as simple as not having a good night's sleep, but find out why they're misbehaving. One of the things I do in my class, Drew, Stuart Abalon, he's a motivational speaker. He does this great TED Talk. And in that TED Talk, he says, kids do well if they can. That's one of my favorite things, because I believe that if you give kids what they need, including respect, they will learn. Personally, I'm not a big behaviorist, but that doesn't mean it doesn't work. The occasional token system, sometimes a class party for good behavior, can be useful, but that's not typically my go-to philosophy. Kids can be motivated by rewards, but don't feel like that has to be your foundation of teaching.
Question 4. So in your experience, how do students' intrinsic and extrinsic motivations influence their engagement and learning? And how can teachers adapt their strategies to address both?
Again, this extends on my previous answers. Kids do well if they can. As a teacher, you'll want to give them encouragement and tools that they need to be successful. And in most occasions, you're going to be pleasantly surprised at the results. If kids respect you, they will want to do good for you. Get to know them, and that leads to a good idea of how to intrinsically motivate them. Also, with the extrinsic, you can blend that in for added rewards. Things like group rewards, like earning points towards a field trip or a party, can be motivating for an entire class. It also gets the kids to talk with each other and motivate each other to do well as a whole group. Sometimes more individualized, smaller rewards, token systems, classroom bucks that allow kids to purchase rewards. And rewards don't always have to be tangible things. Sometimes it can be eating lunch with you, or a gift card, or a trip to McDonald's. Those kind of things can be really motivating, but they don't replace the need for mutual respect. So the more kids respect you, the better they're going to do for you.
Dr. Fass emphasizes the importance of seeing students as individuals and understanding the reasons behind their behavior. This approach aligns with self-determination theory, which suggests that fostering autonomy, competence, and relatedness enhances intrinsic motivation. By getting to know her students and responding with respect, Dr. Fass builds an environment where students feel valued, which encourages their intrinsic motivation. Her use of external rewards, such as a token system or class parties, adds an intrinsic element, but she cautions against relying too heavily on these, as it could undermine intrinsic motivation. In my future high school science classroom, I plan to integrate both intrinsic and extrinsic motivators. I could use rewards like classroom bucks to encourage participation, but will more heavily rely on fostering curiosity and mastery through hands-on activities, aligning with social determination theory and its emphasis on intrinsic motivation. Building these strong student-teacher relationships and offering students choice when it comes to their learning will help maintain their motivation, just as Dr. Fass advocates. This balanced approach, combining intrinsic motivation and other reinforcement strategies, will help students stay engaged and motivated over time. After hearing about her Unit 2 insights, we dove more into the Unit 3 insights, which focus more on specific classroom strategies that we might be able to use. Let's hear what she had to say. So moving on to our third and final unit here. So in this unit, I did a hypothetical case study on a student. This student shows high motivation during hands-on activities, but struggles with more abstract tasks like calculations. I focus on strategies to enhance the student's engagement, particularly by providing more hands-on opportunities, scaffolding, and supporting self-efficacy. I'd love to hear how you would approach a similar situation in your classroom. So the fifth question total. How would you adapt your teaching strategies to support a student who has varying levels of attention and motivation? Do you have any real-world examples of where you've applied these strategies successfully?
This is actually the differentiated instruction that I talked with you about earlier on in our interview. Traditional teaching styles, if you think about it, they included things like reading, writing, arithmetic, lots of memorization, lots of cause-effect. However, in today's classrooms, a rich learning environment goes well beyond that, and there are hundreds of ways to differentiate. You can simply Google them and use them. In terms of real world examples, some of my personal ones include using what I call reflect, refuel, revive. I've done that in the elementary level classrooms. I also do it in my college classes. I do that at the beginning of my classes, and it allows students to become present in the moment, gather their thoughts so that they enter a mindset where they can actually learn when we're together. Another one that students always love is incorporating games that are motivating to students. Kahoot, a lot of times for the younger kids. Mentimeter is one that my students told me about this year. It's a higher level online game, simpler or a little bit more difficult than Kahoot. Our fun ones, they allow students to incorporate technology, which kids always like. Or you can do simpler ones that include things like bingo or Jeopardy, that you don't have to necessarily use that technology, especially if we're looking at kids from a socioeconomic background that might not have that technology to use. Things like learning packets or centers instead of standard worksheets can be really motivating. Also, especially knowing that you're going into science, letting kids experiment and explore before presenting to them how to actually do something is a great way to encourage learning. Personally, my students always loved when I gave them materials in a simple question and gave them that experience to solve it themselves, because not only did they get to put their own techniques into that learning, but the discussions we would have at the end were incredibly rich and really good for learning. That's just a few.
All right, moving on to our sixth and final topical question here. What are some concrete methods you use to build students' self-efficacy and confidence, especially when they encounter challenging tasks that may seem less enjoyable?
So, some more specific ways, I guess, to individualize within differentiated learning include things like scaffolding, which you already talked about, use of task cards, so breaking things into smaller pieces so that kids who are more advanced can do more, kids who are less advanced can do less. Students can have similar activities, but they'll actually be individualized to each of their own levels. Sometimes using technology, simple things like listening to a book in addition to visually reading it can make a world of difference for a child who has a learning disability. And centers so that students can work at faster, slower paces as needed. So putting activities out into your classroom and allowing them to go at them at their own pace are really good ways to build that self-efficacy and confidence. All of those things, like I said, help to build student confidence levels because they're designed to teach at an individual pace. In addition, some other concrete ideas, extra study sessions or opportunities for them to come to your class early or stay late can be helpful and motivating for kids. They like to spend time with you if they know that you like them. And obviously, when all else fails, ask the student, what's the problem? How can I help? Get their opinion. That is self-efficacy in itself because it's teaching them to actually give you the answer and advocate for themselves. Finally, I do go back to that idea that I've talked about multiple times. Mutual respect and a safe learning environment leads to things like confidence and self-efficacy. So be the type of teacher that your students want to do well for because they know you care about them and they will do well.
Dr. Fast's use of differentiated instruction is a strong approach to managing varying levels of attention. Her strategies like Reflect, Refuel, Revive, and integrating games like Kahoot reflect good practices for engaging diverse learners. Providing these various methods for students to demonstrate understanding increases both motivation and achievement. I also appreciate her emphasis on building student confidence through scaffolding, task cards, and individualized support. These strategies are effective because they allow students to experience success at their own pace, helping them stay motivated even when the material becomes challenging. Dr. Fast's focus on creating a respectful, safe environment is just as important, since research shows when students feel supported by their teachers, they are more likely to stay engaged and perform better academically. In my future science classroom, I plan to adopt similar techniques. I could begin class with a similar mindset routine, like Reflect, Refuel, Revive. I will also use exploration-based labs before formal instruction, which will foster student learning, helping them experience concepts before they're actually lectured upon. Following Unit 3, I wanted to throw Dr. Fast a little bit of a curveball to finish up the interview. I think this is a great way to end off and something that any teacher might want to hear. Let's have a quick listen. Thank you for all the great insight throughout the course of this interview. I always think that it's nice to learn from future teachers because honestly, it's the best way for me to become a teacher is to just learn from others. And
Absolutely.
yeah. So, final bonus question here. This is very broad, so let's go any way you want to. What do you think makes a good teacher? And is there anything else you'd like to add in a broad sense about classroom management, teaching styles, motivation, really anything?
I really enjoyed the opportunity to talk with you today. I'm going to leave you with the biggest piece of advice that I got from my own dad. You might know him. He always said, if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. So my biggest piece of advice to you as a future teacher is love the work that you do and know your why you're there in that classroom, why you're there every day. Know that. If you do those two things, you're going to be successful. The best teachers have a passion for the field of education. And if you're that person, kids are going to recognize that you are present for them. And that really sets a beautiful precedence for everything else that happens in your classroom. So your attitude can change the world. Go do great things with it.
That was a great way to end off. Thank you so much. Dr. Fast's response to the bonus question highlights an important truth. Passion is at the heart of good teaching. She reminds us that when teachers love what they do and understand their purpose, Students can feel that energy and are then, in turn, more motivated to learn. In closing, her insights inspire me to create my classroom built on respect, trust, and meaningful connections, a place where every student feels supported, valued, and encouraged to reach their full potential.